Good evening from London, everyone. I'm Luke O'Donovan, the Festival Director for Zoomed In Festival. And yeah, again, it's fantastic to see so many familiar faces back in the comments. Again, thanks for tuning in. We've just been overwhelmed by a response today. So I'm really excited to introduce this event, again, courtesy of Lara Mark from Walmer Yard, who's done a fantastic job of bringing together, I think, what's going to be a really eclectic range of speakers. It's going to be a really exciting conversation. So Lara, would you like to say a bit more about what we've got in store for the next hour or so?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Luke. So yeah, I'm Lara Mark, and I'm the keeper of Walmer Yard, which is a set of 4 houses in West London designed by Peter Salter. Walmer Yard is normally the home of the Baylight Foundation, which is a charity which explores how we experience architecture. So this day of the Zoomed In Festival has really been kind of drawing upon that programming which we normally do here, and kind of revisiting it in a time of Corona. So kind of looking at how we explore and experience buildings and their more sensual qualities when we can't actually visit them anymore. So also, I've just seen Luke's popped up on the screen, the open call. So part of the program today was also, we launched an open call via Instagram for people to take photos of the spaces that they're kind of becoming more accustomed to, as we can't kind of go out and explore and kind of be with our friends anymore. And we've had some really great ones. So me and Jim Stevenson picked out a few of our favorites, which you can see on this page.
So
now,
Lara, do you want to maybe pick out 1 or 2 of the you know, of your favorites from the selection? I think I still need to update it a little bit for the website, but maybe just 1 or 2 of the images that particularly caught your eye.
Sure. So I really like these ones by Station Point. That just really capture kind of being in a space. I think there was a series of three of them, and it kind of really captures the inside of a home and the kind of like the environment. But they're also always kind of like looking in through another space, so almost like looking through these doors and seeing the kind of close confines that someone's living in. I think it's like you're kind of like a secret observer. I really like that.
Yeah, and I think it's the oldest trick in the book. If you want your photo, people to like your photo, you put a dog in it. You can't go wrong there. So yeah, thank you very much to Station Point and everyone else who's put things in. So yeah, after a little starter, I think I'm gonna hand over to Lara. But yeah, we're on zoomedinfestival.com. We still have a load of events tomorrow as well. And keep commenting on my YouTube. I'll be feeding things back to the panel. So yeah, over to Lara and enjoy.
Great, thanks, Luke. Yeah, so in this discussion tonight, we're going to explore how the global pandemic will change how we visit spaces and buildings in the future, and how we can still manage to capture the experiential nature of space when we can't actually collectively be there. So I've asked 5 speakers to address this. So we're going to hear from a photographer, a visualizer, architects, and an experience designer about their kind of ideas of what's going on and how things are changing. So what we'll do is, just to let you know how we'll run through this, we're going to have each of our 4 or 5 speakers do a kind of small presentation with some of their ideas, and then I'll open it up for discussion. So if you've got any points you want to raise or questions you want to ask, then jot them down in the chat, and Luke will feed those over to me. So first up, we've got Ben Blossom. So Ben has been a freelance photographer for 12 years, I think it is. And he was previously the designer and then the photographer for Wallpaper's City Guides. So Ben, do you want to share your thoughts on photography and the experience of visiting buildings?
Yes, hello everybody, thanks for the invite. So Lara, when you first emailed me and contacted me and you asked the question, could I consider whether architectural photography can ever replace visiting a building, I kind of felt a pressure to deliver for all of my photography colleagues. So I was trying to find ways in which that would be possible, and I think, in short, I was struggling to find out or think of images that would allow. Are we frozen? Yeah. Can you hear me?
I think you're okay. I can hear you.
Oh, hello. Sorry. Just because to experience the atmosphere of a place, I think you really need to have, you know, all your senses available to you, really. So the next thing I did, I'm afraid, was go to my bookshelves and try and find some photography books that would help me illustrate how photography could trigger a sensory experience or get a better understanding of atmosphere. What I've actually done is kind of like a desert island discs of books, photography books with sensory sort of experience, which might help us even get through the lockdown that we've got at the moment, so we can use the book form as a way of experiencing space and architecture and buildings. So that was the response that I took, and so I'm going to just share my screen so I can show you this selection that I've made. So I'm gonna go through these top 10 quite quickly. A lot of you will have maybe seen these pictures before, but I'm hoping what you get from them is kind of a different understanding of the sensory experience through photography, which maybe is not stereotypical architectural photography, but some other sorts of viewpoints and sensory understanding. So this book is by Lee Freelander, called Self-Portrait, and all the pictures throughout his book have his shadow appear within them. And the sense I get from this is that you are kind of participating in the scene, and you feel like you're part of the scene. And that's a sort of methodology which I wonder whether could be carried forward into other architectural photography. This book, a lot of you may be familiar with, but again, a series of stills images that, as you flick through, takes you through the appearance of being from an atom to the edge of the universe, by Ray and Charles Eames. And again, I think if we're in an existential crisis at the moment, I think this helps maybe allow you to understand your position in the world and what you might like to do.
Ben, can I just interrupt? I think we're not seeing your screen moving through the images. So I don't know whether you want to just try and reshare. At least I'm not seeing it. I don't know whether others are. Oh, that's it. That started working. That's all right.
Okay. Sorry, I will go back. Okay. So that's the previous book by Lee Freelander, and this book, the book by Charles and Ray Eames, which many of you may be familiar with. And the third book that I added was selected was the one by Joel Sternfield of Stranger Passing, which is a series of large format photographs of people that he met with in his travels through America, and the detail in the pictures means that you, through book form, you can have a kind of relationship and proximity with the person, which, I mean, I think in our current scenario, I think that's about 2 meters in distance, but it allows you to get into the detail and really see the detail of the pictures. This book is by Richard Wentworth, and it's a series of photographs that he took whilst travelling around the streets of Berlin, and he basically focuses in on details that we might otherwise miss in everyday life, and that's the power of photography, to find details and highlight details and kind of champion them and make them more obvious and relevant to everyone. The Blind Photographer is a book which has a series of photographic essays by visually impaired or blind photographers, and this I've chosen 3 images from this which show maybe different sensory sort of impulses that can be taken from the images. So this is a picture of a person's feet. I don't know if you can read the caption there, but it says, "My feet are the central part for giving details." And this image, obviously you can imagine the delight in experiencing even water spray or the sound of the fountains, and then food and the senses that you come with, the smell and taste. And this book is called A Shoot by Denis Darsac, and he invited some dancers to perform for him in the 19th arrondissement in Paris. And this is the power of photography to freeze a frame and create a sort of an illusion. And this is kind of staged within the background of quite ordinary built environment. But when I remember these images, I specifically think of the environment they've been shot in. And so the memory you kind of get from these images is highlighted by this freeze frame. And this following book here, this is a book that I bought when I was commissioned to photograph Canada House by the Canadian High Commission and Stantec Architects. And the building is to the west of Trafalgar Square there. But this sort of viewpoint gives photography the power to understand the infrastructure and setting and location of a place. And also it gives a godlike sort of sensation and viewpoint. I didn't get access to an aeroplane, but I did manage to get access to a building opposite. And this actually, so the only picture of mine actually appears in this presentation, but this one shows a certain prestige to the building, and it certainly felt like a prestigious viewpoint to be able to take of the building. And this book, Wim Wenders, Places Straight and Quiet, and he uses photography to gather, like a sketchbook really, a collection of images that he then uses to influence his films and his other work. And there's a quote that he put or noted with this one. It says, "Sometimes the absence of a thing makes you so much more aware of it, especially if it is something we take for granted, like windows." And the following picture, one thing I always want to see in an unknown city or country are the cemeteries that are like an open book, not to learn about the dead, but about the living. So that's another way of using photography to collect those sort of experiences. And Picture Post, obviously a well-known publication, one of the publications that preceded the Sunday and Saturday supplements that you would get. With the aim of, one of the aims of Picture Post being to be a meeting place for different types of people from different worlds. And these pictures, in terms of emotional response, give you a sense of delight, and I think give an emotional impact. And the final book, another Lee Freelander one, which came in at the last minute to the top 10, was At Work. And I think in these times, if you're missing your work colleagues or your workplace, these pictures might help position you back in that place, depending on what work colleagues you may have. So I think, or I hope these pictures begin to explain how photography and different styles of photography can trigger emotional responses or sensory responses. And we've seen a lot of great images this week, architectural images, but I just wonder how these may feed, this sort of photography and these books may feed into how we can build a better sense of a place and a sensory understanding of a place.
Great, thanks, Ben. I feel like I want you to recommend books to me all the time, because so many of those I didn't know, but they look so interesting. And I think at this time when we're really kind of separated from each other, seeing these images of people and in places is really, really amazing. So I'll pick up some more of your thoughts on this in the discussion.
Okay.
But I want to introduce our next speaker. So next up, we've got David Deroo. So David is an artist and an architect who has been specializing in 3D visuals for the last 10 years while practicing as a fine artist. He works with various practices in London and in Australia, creating high-end visuals for all stages of architectural projects. So David's going to talk to us a little bit about architectural visualizations and how they can conjure up type of things.
Perfect. Thanks, Lara. I'm gonna try to share my screen, hopefully. There you go. It's working. Working?
Not yet. Do you want to try again?
Yep, I can. This one. Share. Working?
Yeah, that's it.
Perfect. Full screen. All right. Yeah, so I specialize in doing visuals in the past 10 years, and being a trained architect and also working in art, I think the process of making visuals is something very interesting nowadays, especially we can't go out. But I think I'm gonna go in the next 5 minutes just through the process of making an image and see if we are at the end actually be able to, have a sense of architecture or not. So usually when we start with a design, we start with an idea, with a rough idea, and then we produce images with something which is not built yet, but hopefully will get built. So first off, some of example I'm gonna show, it's that sketch I made like years ago. Was an art installations, and I decided to take on, I would say, to make images to have a more specific idea of what architecture could be. So that rough sketch turned into a visual, which is atmospheric and kind of invites you to understand the whole building. But although that is very, how to say, generic image in architecture, in a way that you see the whole building, you see one of the person to give a sense of scale and obviously a bit of atmosphere. But because I also photograph and work in art, I usually like to have a more details view towards making visuals. And then I will be drawn more into light and, how do you say, and the experimental sequence of architecture than portraying just the building itself, adding more emotion than just basically the representation of the building. So I came up with that this image, and just remembering when I lived in Australia and I was photographing the Opera House, and having that shadow into a curve with a blue sky. It just remembers me that emotion I had, and I wanted to retranscript it into another image like this one, and turn the final image black and white. So again, like for that specific example, it would be like very, I would say, a very detailed view of a building, but that how I will photograph it as an architect. So it's my view of that building. It wouldn't be I don't believe that someone else will see it that way, but I believe that's my view of this building. And when I do images, I always do it that way. That is my view of the building. So like the first approach was conceptual, and then we have like other project where the environment actually leads the design and the making of the image. So I went on a site visit in the island of Skye in Scotland, and where you got all that amazing scenery, lush vegetation, and very moody sky. So we designed with a mate a house on the hill down to the cove, and it's again a very generic architectural rendering where you have the scenery, the building itself, and you understand. You almost want to be there. I usually add some people in the visual to have just a sense of scale, but not too many to make it believable. And then another viewpoint. So basically we understand the building, we're part of the landscape, but we're not really part of the atmosphere in a way that I believe you need to visit at least once a site to be able to, record the sound and the feeling you had in a very specific site. But again, the same project, but different approach for the rendering. I got a more specific detail of the entrance, which again, a very curated view where, corner to corner, and at a very specific moment where the light casts that shadow and give another triangle. So each image is basically a very specific moment curated into that emotion I want to transfer. And again, that's my emotion. So I believe that people will find it really hard actually to understand and feel the whole building by just having one visual made by someone else, which obviously maybe have a different taste, and also feel, you know, the environment and the space differently. This image, I made it a year ago, just after Notre Dame burned down, well, the roof burned down. And the idea of this image was neither to give a very specific design, but more to give an idea and along an article as I was writing, where the most important thing with the image was a poesy about Paris. And you can't take that away by putting a huge tower on the top or totally change, you know, the feeling and the scale of the church. So that specific image is more a wonder for other people to think about it rather than a given image where it's extremely curated. And then coming after, you know, Notre Dame, and I'm going to show you a few images of architecture building which are standalone. And when we actually, you know, it's almost a heroic photography of a building. So that perfect shot you wait as a photographer when the lights come in, or like, you know, the golden hour in the morning or in the sunset. So when we do images for those specific projects, we always look for the best timing during the day. So every images are extremely curated into one moment during the day. So it's really hard to give a full sense of the whole building because it does change during the day with the condition of people using it, with the sunlight and the weather. But for, you know, making architecture and those specific building we render or design, it's really important to use the best time and, you know, setting to make it moody or inviting, depending on obviously your the goal of the image. But like once again here, one image for coffee architects for like a museum in Norway, where obviously nature is a centerpiece, and you got, you know, that jewel in the middle, which is a museum. So basically, we like painters, a side of architect or being part of the architecture team, and we have to make the building comes alive with the image without even being built. And then we got sort of non-heroic building where they do have to basically blend with its surrounding, having a dense urban fabric where you have, you know, all the building to talk to, like on the image, but also have like people walking by. And on those images, it's more about the atmosphere than actually the building itself. Yeah, and then you can start to feel more about that moment during the day rather than having just that specific building in the center. And then because we always choose one moment to make one image, so sometimes it's really difficult because building are multifunction and they do attract different people and we want to give different emotions. So you choose different lights and maybe weather, but like for in the morning, on the evening, and like for example, this is the same building but different time during the day. It is not a heroic, you know, design, but it has to just give a sense of how the street's going to be animated, and you would basically just want to be invited into the image. And then we got, you know, interior rendering, which is a bit more usually cozy, but where we can actually curate as a moment of the day you want actually to portray. And again, like as Ben was saying earlier, we got a dog, you know, on the picture. But yeah, it's like a house in Ibiza, and the only thing you want to see is how cozy the house is, but not in just one shot. So you just want to give an idea of different small, you know, portion of the house, so you can feel yourself the entire building. So I believe that making few different images in the same building give you more an opportunity to be invited into the architecture, unless it's obviously a different aspect where it's more for an art installation and a very specific light and materials where you basically just have one and it's like an aerial shot, but still to have a feeling of scale and, you know, light. And I'm going to finish with that as a project, which is like a lake, a house by the lake, pretty much the same as Richard Mayer in Chicago, well, Michigan. But the idea here is like the house is the centerpiece, but actually the architecture turn around the nature, and the nature should be actually the centerpiece. So we decided to make different images here where you basically have very specific moment into the house. So, and looking outside, and nature basically becomes the most important thing, and the environment is therefore like, you know, the most important. And then on that last image for the project, it's like actually having the lake in the background, the reflection of the forest, of the tree in the back, and, you know, that share. So it just invites you to just wanted to come, have a seat, read your book, look at the ocean, at the lake or the forest. So basically it's a really hard, I would say, thing to do to make visuals, because you have to make the choice of a very specific moment when you actually decide when it's the best to make it, or not the best, but the moment and the emotion you want to actually trigger of the person who's going to look at the image. It shouldn't just be a commercial, you know, viewing of the building, how it's going to look like that. No, you want to invite people to think about it, how architecture is going to be used, how you're going to feel into that space. So in a way, it's easy because we're making just one image, and you have to put all your you're thinking around and actually make it work. But yeah, just to finish, yeah, as I was saying, I think very hard to kind of feel the architecture if you're not visiting it, because everyone has a different feeling about it. But making visuals is like me or someone else making an image, and you basically give the feeling away, and people got invited into your image, and then therefore the architecture.
Thanks, David.
Yeah.
There's some really, really stunning images there. I think what's becoming quite clear is that it's in order to kind of portray the experience, you've almost got to place a person within that image.
Well, exactly. Maybe not that last image, because he was like, I wanted to be in that one, so I don't want to place anybody else, basically. But yeah, usually it's nice to have like some person to animate it and see, you know, the space activated.
Yeah. Okay, so up next we've got Lara Lesmes and Fredrik Hellberg from Space Popular. So Space Popular creates architecture, furniture, exhibitions, and many other things. Both physical and virtual space, so they concentrate on how the two kind of realms can blend together. So Lara and Fredrik are going to tell us more about their thoughts on VR as a way to experience buildings and space. David, can I just get you to stop sharing your screen, and then Lara and Fredrik can share theirs. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Lara, for the intro and for inviting us to this exciting event.
Yeah, so what we thought we'd share today is a little bit of the work we've actually been doing for the past, let's say, 4 years, which maybe has a little bit of extra relevance in these times of isolation, but something that we think applies to the larger context of the world today. Revolving what we could call virtual gatherings. So of course, what we're doing right now is a form of virtual gathering, right? We're seeing a bit of each other's homes, and we can see each other, and you can see us. But what you're seeing here on the screen is an example of what's commonly referred to as a social VR platform, which is something that's existed for about 4 or 5 years, and something that we engage with a lot, both with our practice and some of the exhibitions, but also with our students. Here we see on the screen now a screenshot from one of the gatherings that one of our students, Agi, organized in December, which is a virtual pub where each and every single character you see on screen is actually represented by a real human being wearing a virtual headset, and then representing themselves through their avatar in this pub. And some examples of something we did just last week. This is now we're starting our term with our students, and we can't actually see them. So we built a virtual meeting place together with our students, for our students and for our university at large. So this is the first unit meeting we had, where you can see Lara there on the right-hand side. And then we organized the day after the first meeting with the entire university. And we can see here, for those of you who knows, the purple person on the right is our history and theory coordinator, Mark Cousin, and then our director, Eva Franch, in the rainbow outfit on the left, having a conversation.
One thing to highlight about this type of gatherings, whether they are via headset or in this case, which is via web VR, which anyone can access just through a web browser, is that as opposed to what we're doing now, where all the voices are coming out of the same screen for each one of us, in these spaces, sound is spatially located, and therefore if you have a crowd of people, maybe one person can talk and everyone can listen to that person, but you can also have side conversations, move on the side, and it performs much more similarly to a bar or any other type of social space. Then we wanted to bring up a couple of principles that we stand for when we design virtual spaces. One is photorealism. We believe virtual spaces are perceived audiovisually. However, they are experienced multisensorially. This has a lot to do with how other senses are triggered in association with what we see and hear. You can only see this mosaic wall, but you also know what it feels like. And the higher the fidelity and the richer our library of haptic sensations, the better we will be at auto-completing virtual worlds. And with auto-completing, I of course mean at filling in touch, smell, and all the other senses that cannot be perceived digitally. Also, the virtual world is by definition referential. Something is virtual because it's almost another thing, not in its entirety, but in its essence. So if we want to tap into a wide pool of haptic references, we must remain as referential of the physical world as we can. Often people complains about why virtual worlds look too similar to reality, but we actually think that is an important value, at least in its early days, because the architecture of virtual worlds is pure language.
And this is something that we see increasingly happening in all levels of these kind of virtual environments. This is a screenshot from perhaps the most advanced computer game ever made that was released about 2.5 weeks ago. It's Half-Life Alyx that we had the pleasure of completing. That's played through one of the virtual headsets. You can see the fidelity of the hands of the player, that you're looking down at your real hands and you see these hands where you can see the folds of the fabric, and you can see the little mechanics of these strange science fiction gadgets. Yeah.
Another, perhaps not so obvious, but something that we think is actually quite important in virtual experiences is layout mimicry. So maintaining familiar layouts, even if it doesn't make any sense, because you are not going to sit, especially in this case, which is using, again, another web VR virtual world, you are accessing it through the screen. You're not gonna sit in any of those steps. You're not gonna use basically that layout as you would have if it was built. However, we find that very often it really helps structure social behavior and deal with the possible awkwardness of the early days of virtual worlds. This is actually a space we created for a conference that took place like 3 weeks ago, fully in this web VR platform that is actually called Mozilla Hubs, where we are having a discussion about how to work on civic spaces in an augmented future. And also something that we observe, this is not something we have designed, but this is something that happens very often in as layouts for conferences or other kinds of events in the virtual realms, is that they really take the shape of actual conference halls or lecture halls. And again, another form of mimicry that perhaps might seem unnecessary, but it sort of helps structure that behavior. And it also, observing this brings to us the fact that if people is making this effort to create these environments when they could just meet in an abstract plane, they would not need to build anything. It highlights the role of architecture beyond shelter. It means that somehow having that enclosure or having those objects, furniture, that layout, etc., means something more than what it provides practically. So we find that actually quite interesting, that perhaps it's more about its meaning than about its function also in the physical realm.
And this can, of course, never really replace any form of physical interaction, although it has maybe particular interest now, but it's of course something that's important to think about for the future. And many of our projects deals with, let's say, the potential future of the next, let's say, 20 years. And this is a project that we finished in September 2019 called a Venn room, which speculates on what happens in the future when we access these things through something similar to this, and where it's so common that most people that have smartphones today will have something like that instead, and where through communication from places like the home starts to be overlap. So this film we released in full in a 2-dimensional version just last week on the zine, so you can all see it, where we imagine that this will create a sort of global home, to borrow McLuhan's term, of a series of Venn rooms where all of our homes gets overlapped, where you could potentially share part of your home with a partner or a friend or a family member who lives somewhere else, where their furniture and objects and their bodies gets basically augmentedly teleported into your home.
So now we're just sharing a little bit behind, but we imagine that with the environments being three-dimensionally mapped, we might end up creating these hybrids of our homes, and perhaps they would become quite significant with those people that you spend more time with.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys. I think for me, the idea of that kind of Venn room seems ever more kind of present in this nature of kind of lockdown where we can't be with our families. I feel like there'll be a real place for that kind of crossover of spaces. So I'm going to just introduce our final speaker. So our final speaker is Sam Bompas. Sam's the co-founder of Bompas and Parr, which is one of the leading creators of multi-sensory experience design. So you might know Bompas and Parr for their clouds of alcohol, their glow-in-the-dark ice cream. I think they even flooded a grade 2 listed building with punch once. So Sam's going to tell us his thoughts on how the current pandemic might change our future interactions with spaces and with each other.
All righty, thank you very, very much. I've got to say, it's just a total joy being here and fascinating listening to all the other panelists. I've been taking furious notes as you've been going. Ben, thank you. I think I've got my reading list, my shelf sorted for a little while. And it's a great joy to be here. Here we go. Let's do some sharing. Let's do that. This work. Share. Not least because I'm, guess coming at architecture from an outsider perspective. I'm not an architect. I'm not trained as an architect, but I am an enthusiast, and I spend an awful lot of time with architects. So, of course, for my studio is architects, 5 architects in the studio. My partner's an architect, and really come at architecture from, well, not done a lot of theoretical work. Space Populaire is fascinated to unpack and learn more about what you're doing. We really come at stuff through just doing things very, very quickly, seeing what happens and trying to learn swiftly how we can hopefully do it better from what went wrong. And this really came about through about 13 years ago, we started up a company making fine English jellies. We couldn't afford the molds we wanted. So my business partner, Harry, who was in his final year at Bartlett at the time, worked out he could use the same programs that he'd been using to design buildings, namely Rhino, which I think was a trainer program originally, to design jellies. And that's what you get. I think I'm going to reflect really quickly on the sorts of things we've done in the past and what we're having to do now in the imminent present and immediate future in response to this. And everything at Bompas and Parr that we've done, well, historically, it results in creating experiences where large groups of people get together and have a pleasurable sensory time together. So it's things like multi-sensory fireworks, where you see fireworks explode in the sky, you taste them, smell them. There's the crowds, had a crowd of 250,000 people, see red fireworks in the sky, and you would taste strawberry, there'd then be peach snow, edible banana confetti. The only thing that was really got my goat about that project was the term multi-sensory for it, because it's a complete misnomer. You're having a multi-sensory experience in the room you're in right now. And I always call it flavor fireworks. It's the thing that differentiates it. It's incredibly multi-sensory. It's visual. You see that here, the cacophony of it. You can smell it all. Those people are definitely getting a lot of haptic stimulation in there as they sort of touch each other in that crowd. But yeah, so when we're creating a lot, people ask us, is it going to be multi-sensory? And of course, it's going to be multi-sensory. Every experience you have is, because you're an embodied person. There's something to think, actually, when I was listening to some of the other panelists' presentations, and something I'd love to talk about more. And I noticed also in some of my slides as well that I've got coming up. What is it with architects and designers not really liking people in their pictures, be it in their renders or not? And they're David, you're talking about the people being there for the sense of scale, and also so you can imagine yourself in the images. There are not a lot of people in there, and even though at Bompas and Parr we spend our time in retail and entertainment trying to bring people together around food and drink, even in some of the images of our projects, there aren't a lot of people. So it's things like Guinness tasting room. Now, normally you have 1.7 million people go through this room every single day, and yet it's probably the only day over the last the only month over the last 20 years that it's had so few people through the installation as is in this picture. So what is it about the design world not having people in spaces? When we're designing spatial and multi-sensory experiences, we tend to have a 6-phase process in terms of people's experience to give people a remarkable experience. And in each one of those phases, all the senses are inherently addressed. So your journey through a space typically comes with some sort of anticipation. That's all the journey before. That's some big signifiers drawing you in, some form of compression. You can see this as you go into the tasting rooms at the Guinness Storehouse, which is the most visited place in Ireland. And of those 1.7 million people that go there each year, 40% of people have never tasted Guinness ever before. So you have some sort of a compression which takes you out of the world you were in before and sets the rules. You have some sort of a big reveal. So this is big Barisol light box at the end. Actually, the contrast really makes your pupils dilate it physically. It has got a physical impact just using the light there. You then are exploring using smell, some of the flavors you might find in Guinness, and then you get, and with that, you're challenged by some of the hosts to identify the smells there. Now, everyone's got an incredible sense of smell. You breathe 26,000 times a day on average. I think you smell differently out of each nostril as well, and that changes every 3 hours. So try it if you're having a drink in hand or you're having dinner later. but people still aren't very confident in using words and linking that to that sense, because we don't really navigate the world through using words and smells, even though it's very important. So there's also a sense of risk when you ask people, what's that smell? The same thing like when you're at a restaurant and the sommelier is asking you to choose the wine you're worried about. Are you going to choose the right one? It's a sense of personal risk. There's then a sense of reward, which is getting Guinness. So food and drink obviously makes the brain light up. So it's a really good reward. And there's a moment of reflection, which is all of the time onwards as well. And we find that by creating different sensory moments through all of this, you're able to give people a really rich experience in a very, very short space of time. So, we've built drive-throughs beneath Selfridges, working with the light artist Jason Bruce studio, and there you have 120 seconds to give people a memorable experience. Doing things with so again, this is it. There's no people in this. This is beneath Westfield Shopping Centre, and it's a cocktail bar staffed by mermen mixologists, who you can see down in the bottom centre there. And they would shake your drinks as they swam around in their sort of float up bar, and doing things hot as well, so cooking with lava. Now, of course, 4 weeks ago, a year's worth of work for us, working the senses, working at intersections where people come together, was immediately put on hold. And so we've been looking at navigating this new world of us all sitting in our private space and then connecting in much the way we are doing now. And so this has seen us do all sorts of different other projects than we'd normally do. So working with the Design Museum to create a fountain of hygiene, which is sanitizer design competition with the British Red Cross, and that's actually, I'm wholeheartedly enthusiastic about bringing people back into physical public space. So this is looking at the future of hand sanitization with the Design Museum. So if people can safely and more swiftly move into the public realm. We're looking at, I'm fascinated by behavioral change as it goes on. So I think it takes between 21 and 30 days to have a life-changing habit. Many people around the world are many more days into lockdown or coming out of it. What are those deep behavioral impacts that COVID-19 is going to have? So we the strategists in my team put together a report looking at what happens imminently, what happens in the deep future, and how are we going to rehabilitate touch? Touch is such a fundamental part of being human. There's a slide I was going to put in, but I thought it's just too alarming about what happens when there's when you lose your sense of touch, and it's quite a rare condition. And one lady had this condition. She developed it over her life, and she actually ended thinking that she had an itch, but she couldn't feel like when she was scratching it. She scratched all the way through her skull and was about to go through the brain's epithelium before there was an intervention. So touch is important. But so we're looking at, could you create physical spaces? And this is all on our website as well, so you can download it, have it, where you're able to rehabilitate some of the senses that perhaps we're shy of connecting with one another. And today we're launching DIY decadence as well. So how can you, using store cupboard, things that are knocking around the back of your store cupboard and might have done for many years, recreate some of those wonderful decadent experiences wherever you are, just with whatever resources you have at your disposal, because pleasure's important too. So that's really what we're focusing on at the moment, and fascinated to see how it all develops.
Thanks, Sam.
Sorry, I actually had a question that's been burning, because I know we're going to questions now.
Sure.
Really keen to get one in early, but I was fascinated with the other panelists. A lot of the work that we've seen and has been shared and thought are visual, and then as a secondary term, sonic, and Space Popular, you talked about some haptics as well. But what of the three sort of lower senses would sorry, I'll stop that. What are the 3 lower senses would you introduce to your experience of architecture?
Ooh. Lara and Fredrik, do you want to have a go at answering Sam's question first?
Well, you are the master of making architecture that you can eat, so I don't think we can beat you on that.
But touch comes first, I think.
Yeah.
It's surprising, maybe, but I mean, it definitely has to do with that. You know, you don't need to build something specifically for there to be touch, but you know, for smell and, well, especially for taste, you do need to, you know, you can taste anything, but who wants to taste a brick wall? You know, like maybe someone does, but otherwise, in order to satisfy the taste buds, there's an enormous amount of usually labor required. Whereas touch, you know, you know, you can touch anything if it's in your grasp.
But I think also a touch is the one that is triggered more often by just through visual triggers. I think we don't think that much about it, but like we were calling this whole new trend that you see so many like beautiful images of this like sort of loops, very beautifully rendered with hyper-realistic materials doing strange things. And we were calling it visual ASMR because it's like strangely pleasurable to look at, because it's this like continuous perfect motion, but also because of their materiality, right? So I think it's like the visual experiences that are constantly triggering touch. So even when we're not touching things, we are touching them through our experiences. So the wider your library of tactile experience, the more open you will be to new ones.
It definitely feels like we're get a sense of taste and smell, and definitely touch when seeing your work, Sam, for sure. And also David, your images, it definitely feels like you're kind of there, and also the examples that you showed Ben, you know, it brings you in.
Yeah. Wasn't it Mies van der Rohe who said you should lick brick walls?
I'm sure he did. I'm not surprised.
Don't do it, kids. Don't do it.
David, would you like to respond? Because I know maybe you could pick up something on the ASMR of visuals.
Yeah, well, the idea, to make visuals more, I would say, either believable and welcoming. Usually, I found it's the most important thing is texture of what I'm using. But also, obviously, the light, how the light is eating that texture. And so the interaction between light and, well, shadows and texture and depth into the material is actually, for me, the most important thing when it comes to render. And not much about putting people in, as I was saying earlier. It's not I don't like to put people in, but it does set the image too much as, I wouldn't say commercial, but because my personal taste is when I do go somewhere to take a picture of a building, I always wait people to pass by. I don't want people all around, unless that person is extremely interesting and doing something interesting, and then I take the picture and it becomes the center of the image. But otherwise, I just like, the rendering usually to have, you know, that architecture, very well framed images. And usually, like, if material are not inviting enough, it's usually really hard to get into the image. It's very, how to say, sleek, and, you know, the more you put texture and Photoshop onto your texture, even after it's rendered, the more depth you add to the image. And it's all the small details, that the wall, which is not extremely straight, but straight with this like chip corner, that kind of thing, that doesn't trigger your vision to tell you it's a fake images. We all see that actually it's 3D rendered, but it's not photorealistic either. But it's like, it's a very specific trying to eat that emotional bit. It's, for me, it's about material and light usually.
Don't you think, sorry to just jump in, don't you think that, will change now when you get in your own work and also in commissions coming up after this, or in this ongoing crisis, that the kind of representation of human beings in visualizations of architecture?
Well, I had some issue in the past, not issue, but like comment from clients, obviously telling me that we need more people, but we're targeting a specific class of the people. So we want, just like, are we talking about gentrification here? I was just like, so that's why it's like, I got even, I got very uncomfortable about choosing which people I like to have a lot of diversity, but usually clients, they just want to basically sell. If it's an apartment, like an inside apartment, they usually just want like a straight couple with 2 kids or whatever into the apartment. And I'm just like, yeah, that's not really me. So yeah, I do have already had trouble before, but at some point, if I'm part of the design team, I usually try to push it my way, obviously. But if I'm just commissioned to make the image and well, I have to follow what the clients obviously ask.
Orgies is going to be very popular in the future.
Pardon?
No, I'm joking. No, just that it's changing probably the way that you want to, you hear constantly comments on Twitter and stuff with this, that it's weird to see people, like photographs and films with people being intimate with each other, like,
yeah,
it's probably going to change the commissions and stuff.
Well, I do love also photograph as an art. I don't believe that my photograph are just to inform my work in fine art or rendering, but I don't believe my photographs are good enough to be art. But there is something into photographing people day to day, like Ben was showing earlier, makes me feel that, it will be very, I would say, untrue to take that person into my rendering, because it's not where it fits. It fits where it's been taken, with its own environment. So even if I'm creating environment of the image, I could cut a lot of people around, but yeah, it's also faking a lot, while we can just make the architecture as close as it would be in reality. Right. Yeah.
I want to just pick up on the kind of issue of diversity and inclusivity. For me, I wonder whether things like experiencing art when you can't be there, so like things like VR and kind of sensory experiences, could maybe open up the world of architecture to others who wouldn't normally step through the doors, or even wouldn't have the opportunity to access. So what are your thoughts on that? Maybe Sam, you might want to say something about kind of experiential.
I mean, yeah. For me, I think the gift of technology is when technology is going to become seamless with our lived experience. For me, I'm getting countless invites to come on, and socialize with my friends in all sorts of weird and wonderful digital formats. And I've been resolutely refusing them to work on the relationships of the people that I can sit in a room with, of which there are 2. So my household, there are 2 people I can hang out with, and that's been the sum of it for a long time. I'm up for that sort of network of other people, inviting them in when it becomes very, very seamless. And even this medium that we're on, as we're conversing, I know that if we're on a panel discussion, the flow of the conversation would be remarkably different. Because you'll be able to see people's body language, your gesture. I've got no idea what the audience thinks for good or worse, but you can see when you're giving a panel discussion, are people walking out or are they coming in? Are they staying? And you adjust accordingly. So I think there is lots with, as an experienced designer, we spend a huge amount of the budgets that we have on making sure that the experience is as accessible to as many people as possible. And we learned the hard way. The first time we ever had a big budget was when we were flooding the roof of Selfridges to make a boating lake and float up bar. That was on a roof. You had to we spent about a third of the budget putting in ramping and making sure it's all fully accessible. And this is for an installation that was open for 4 days. We opened up, the senior client's brother came, and he came in a wheelchair. And after that, I was just like, that is it. I'm making sure that, there's, yeah. I know that was garbled, but you get the gist.
I'm going to briefly interrupt because it's NHS clapping time, and my street is going mad. So I think we should all just have like a little clap. Go here. Oh, yeah, there's a lot of saucepan banging going on out there. So I guess back to this, I had some other questions about. I know Luke put one up here, which really chimed with what I was thinking around kind of sensory experience. And he asked, how can we share alternative sensory ways of communicating architecture with people who have sensory impairments? So kind of how do people, who can't see or can't hear, kind of get engaged with VR or photography or things like that? Do you want to talk about that? Maybe Lara and Fredrik, you want to start?
Yeah, actually one of the most meaningful experiences I've had in one of these headsets recently was a film about what it's like to be blind, but it can only be experienced by people who are not blind because it's fully visual. But of course, there's something that like any new technology is rarely driven by serving to a disenfranchised minority, and that's something that then usually comes much later. You look at any kind of new technology, and it's usually always commercially driven. Like we see this kind of new virtual environments, we constantly ask for either a nationalization of parts of it or a bigger national engagement on a policy level. But it's probably too early, and this is something that happened with the introduction of the telegraph and the telephone and the television and all of these things. It came much later, any kind of consideration of anyone who is in a less fortunate position. And definitely we see the same. On the other hand, I would just add that we do meet a lot of people in these social VR platforms who tell us and who experience things that they have no chance at all to experience where they happen to be physically. And that might be about sexuality or about all sorts of other things, or just basically different kind of interests where new communities are formed. And that's obviously happened as long as the internet's been around, but it's very different when you can bring parts of your body inside, and where you do have, even if they're clumsy, hands to touch someone with. There's no responsive touch at all. It's all symbolic and it's very low tech still. But having said that, people do have meaningful interactions with people that they don't have access to usually.
But I think also for example, for someone with visual impairment, a virtual reality experience, as long as it has well done sound is spatially mapped. So basically you can, I am no expert on this, but they could potentially orient themselves in very similar ways as they would otherwise. And every VR experience that we have created has actually been a mixed reality piece. So we always create an object, and there is always an object that you interact with, and that helps you understand the relationship of the physical and the virtual. And there is always a VR guide that is explaining things, and in that way it becomes also more accessible. But I mean, we also do it because we think for the general public is more interesting like that. Now we are questioning that a lot because we are not sure when we will get to do an experience that relies so much on touching stuff. But we hope very soon, and we will certainly not stop planning them, so that as soon as the door opens, we can go back to touching things and people.
Ben, I wondered if you could pick up on that point based almost on the book you showed, which showed kind of blind people in spaces. I wondered whether you might have something to say on kind of photography and how we interact with that when we don't always have all of our sensory experience. I think you're muted though, you might need to unmute yourself.
The real key, I mean, I actually, my desk space is at the Brunswick Centre in Russell Square, which is right near the RNIB, and they regularly bring their guide dogs around Brunswick Centre as a kind of, it's a kind of a training arena for them to train the guide dogs, and also the blind people use that space as a place to learn how to use their sticks to navigate their way around space and things. And I get that's quite an interesting way to see how architecture can be a teaching tool, a certain space, a teaching tool to learn how to deal with a lack of a sense or what you're doing. I mean, I wonder sometimes whether communications are more powerful in some scenarios when you do have less senses. When it comes, I'm just thinking about some of the films that we watched over the course of the past few days at this festival. There are some quite powerful film pieces. The one by well, Jim Stevenson, and he is one of the Secular Retreats, and that one had a very strong audio to it. If there was no visual there, would you still be taken to a place that you could understand? And maybe sometimes it's paring down senses could make more powerful communications. I don't know.
Yeah, and Sam, do you want to pick up on your research on touch? I feel you know, you've begun to really explore how we might need rehabilitating almost with touch after this.
Yeah.
Yeah, God, it's just amazing watching, well, just what everyone's watching a lot of film. Well, many people are watching a lot of films. I'm watching a lot of films, and you see some of the scenarios in them, and you're like, wow, look at that. That's so taboo. That's so filthy. Look at them, they're animals. You know, and I think it's, you know, I really miss the level of touch that we've had before, and I'm interested in how we codify touching people again in the future, in a way that people can feel comfortable with. In the Fluid Landscapes report that we published, Rob, one of our designers, he has started designing a semaphore system so that people can demonstrate through pocket squares placed in their top pocket. Are they up for an air kiss, full kiss, a hug, maybe just shaking hands, or is it bumping elbows? So, like, you know, what level could they be comfortable with? Which I think is wonderful. I worry that not everyone's going to get it, but at least maybe it needs to be a badge where it's spelt out with a universal language. But yeah, can't wait to welcome back in touch. But you know, with all of this, again, you're in a haptic world now, and you know, on a chair, it's quite hard. There's you know, all my key, you know, not living in a world devoid of the senses at the moment. We're just using approximations of many of them to connect in ways that we wouldn't.
Yeah. So I'm going to pick up on a few questions from the audience now, because we've had quite a few kind of coming in. So there's one here from Sergio Lopez, which asks, do you think that there'll be a greater kind of research and development of new technologies and these kind of VR features in the future as a result of this kind of pandemic? Maybe Space Popular, you guys are the best to answer this one.
But people is rushing through, like literally, people who has platforms that develops VR platforms for weeks. They have been like freaking out trying to fulfill all the requests, and in the VR world, everyone was waiting to see will it pick up, and this happened. And of course, like so many conferences and events that were planned. I mean, not as many as are using video conference like this, but a lot are shifting to that. So there is certainly a fever, and at the same time, this crazy VR game that Fredrik has been playing called Half-Life came out. That has also been a huge, the one that we were showing the hands up. It's been a revolution. So there has certainly been a moment of fever right now in VR. I don't know. I would say that it will become a bit more normalized, or it will become more part of our lives once it becomes part of work. I think similar to the personal computer and the smartphone, it comes in through work and then it seeps into just everyday life. And then suddenly, before you know it, it's just part of your day, inseparable part of your day to day.
And when it's connected, I mean, who remembers the Palm Pilot? You got to be over 35, I think, to know what a Palm Pilot is, because it wasn't really connected. That's the only reason. It was really amazing, Palm Pilots, but just on a practical level, you know, they're all sold out. The headsets, all the VR spaces we go to, they're all full of people.
You can't see because there is so much crowd.
Yeah, and we were in a meetup with about 30 VR artists around the world the other day. That normally most of them have never been there, but on the other hand, you know, it's so early. You know, Apple and Facebook, they're releasing their glasses in the next 2 years. There's gonna be another boom and a bang before this gets normalized. We speculate even with this another 10 years before your granny, you know, knows what it is. But eventually for sure, we unless something even more disastrous happen than this, we will not have any smartphones or any computer screens in 15, 20 years. And this is the beginning, but certainly there's a big new found interest for sure, which means also you get to meet a lot of newcomers, which is really lovely when you meet someone who's never been inside a space like this before, and you get to invite them and explain how it works, and you can do this, and you can give a hug. It's not a hug at all, but everything is kind of codified and strange, but it's a quite beautiful, wonderful moment.
But the hardware is still so annoying, and we like to say that we are in the fax machine days, wearing a stupid box in our faces. I mean, what are we doing? Very soon we're gonna laugh so much at this.
And most of our money goes into buying all this stupid hardware that's going to be like, we're going to chuck it all out in 2 years.
No, keep it as trophies.
Great. And then there's another question here, which it was originally for David, but actually I think I'd like David and Ben to pitch in on this. So someone has asked, what is your vision on the role of CGI and on photography in an architectural project? Can they live together, or should they kind of be separate beasts? David, do you want to answer first, and then we'll get Ben?
The thing, well, in architecture is that, again, when we create images or even building, like architects are very, very drawn to the final shots they're gonna get when it gets built. So it's they want a sexy building, and basically to sell for themselves, to the clients, they want a sexy image where everything is aligned perfectly with basically not too much fuss, but like mostly architects today, especially in London, actually, they design towards beauty and not really toward functions or program. And it's really hard on us or myself or people who make images to kind of step aside of that, because that's what the clients, well, it's usually not the client, it's basically people who make it visuals or even photograph of architecture is going to be for architecture magazines and architects. And because we like our eyes to be pleased when we look at a magazine where everything is well curated, we kind of not easily, but we basically ask to kind of do what's trendy. And what's trendy is usually something super sleek and not, you know, having an age build. Like I love sometime taking some of my render and having 10 or 20 years sort of Photoshop on top of it, where you got a bit more of like, not water damage, but, you know, dirt on the wall and stuff. So the building actually lived a bit, and it's not just fresh out for the magazine. However, it's really hard to basically sell that to the clients, because they're going to say, yeah, but like, it's dirty. It's like, yeah, but it's going to look in 10 years. You're not building for a year. So yeah, so that's my take on, the place of cheap CGIs and photograph.
Great. And Ben, I wonder if you've got any thoughts on whether, if you can't visit buildings to photograph them anymore, whether like there'll be a growth in people creating kind of as-built CGIs, and you'll kind of, I don't know, things will change.
Yeah, I mean, I do model photography as well for architects, and obviously creating that 3D form maquette's quite a useful tool for understanding space and moving light around it. And all the viewpoints actually that David was showing on his renders with the similar sort of viewpoints we're asked to get with model photography, and you're at eye level and you're trying to evoke the experience would be of the completed building before it's built. I think we should try and be a bit more kind of dangerous, explore more ways. I think the reason I showed those books was to show you can get a various type of image and understanding of space and place and built environment by different photographic techniques. So why not explore that a bit more? And that would sit alongside CGI. And obviously that relies on the commissioning client being open to exploration of different ways of producing different types of image. But I think that's starting to happen a little bit anyway, actually. I think there's more portraiture involved in understanding place and context of environment as well.
Yeah. And we've had another question for you, Ben. I'm just going to throw them all at you at once. From someone who says, do you think that you reflect the sense of what you feel or what you might want your audience to feel in your photography?
I think it depends on the brief, actually. Sometimes a client will say, go and explore it yourself and explore the space yourself and find out how you want to illustrate it. Different time periods, different lighting and conditions, different environmental conditions at that time. But the best brief for me would be to do that and go and do it myself. But then often, architects have a preconceived idea, based on all the maquettes and the models they've built up and those lines of sight and those viewpoints that they want to champion and celebrate in the final image. So sometimes you have to take that route.
Yeah, great. And I've just got I think we're going to start to wrap up, but I've just got one kind of final question really for Sam as we begin to wrap up. I wonder, Sam, in this time when you've been working on kind of sensory experiences for years, and you've probably got a lot in the pipeline that are coming up. Are you having to kind of reevaluate those and change them? And do you see yourself kind of maybe looking at working with VR artists and things like that because you can't create kind of these big sensory worlds where people come together at the moment?
Well, I think to a certain extent, yes. We're a lot of the stuff that we're planning at the moment, working on even larger projects, but even further out. So a lot of our shows are in 2021, 2022, and I would hope at that time we're able to move more towards a normality that we had before. Rather than what we're experiencing now. One of the things that I'm excited about is, we've touched on it in this conversation, is the sort of rush to new technology, and not quite sure how it shapes up. But one of the things I always love is, if you go rock climbing or you go bouldering, which now seems really taboo because you're all touching the same point of the wall. But one of the things that's great is within that single rock face, you've got so many different ways that you can approach it. And so you can have, total amateurs, novices, it's their first time, whereas people have spent an entire lifetime mastering the art of scaling that wall and all finding new and interesting things in it. And I think my hope is when some of these embodied, shared public space experiences come back, we're able to better mesh together some of the virtual worlds as well. It's a little bit like the Venn audiences that can look something from a space safely.
Great. We began to lose you a bit at the end.
I give it a praise.
But I think it was a good point about kind of meshing these two together, the worlds of digital and non-digital, which I think is what a lot of Space Popular's work is kind of focused on.
And I think to add on to that, sometimes when you try and build on some of the senses, such as you know, some smell onto experiences that are perhaps virtual or digital or photographic or filmic, there are some examples of people having a bash at it with more or less success. So you have things like William Castle doing smell-o-vision, so having a film screening, they pump the odor in at the salient points of the film. The problem is it's very easy to get smell into a space. It's very hard to get it out on a time signature. So funnily enough, not every cinema has odor incorporated in the film intentionally, because the film by itself is better, one might say.
I remember when I was a kid, I think it was the BBC did like a smell-o-vision thing, and you got like a scratch while you were watching the TV. It was mad. It was like the early ways of kind of multi-sensory experience. But on that note, I think we'll I'm going to invite Luke back into the room. Luke, if you want to join us again. But I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of you for joining us, and to everyone who's kind of been adding comments and taking part in the audience side of things. It's been a really great discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to second those thanks as well. It's been kind of really refreshing for our program. So, I mean, we haven't really been talking too much about photography tonight, but we've been talking about ideas that we can all learn from, and it's, you know, great to kind of see some new and exciting stuff. There's something I really need to settle for the comments. What has a better architecture, The Sims or Mario Kart?
What was the two options? Mario Kart or
The Sims.
The Sims.
Mario Kart.
The Sims, obviously.
Mario Kart.
The Sims is more varied. But you know, Mario Kart is the whole nostalgia thing. So
Take 10 years off you as well.
I feel like Lara and Fredrik are now going to be arguing about this all evening.
because you're gonna be, why did you do this?
But you have to come back for our panel talk on the architecture of Mario Kart and how to photograph it when we can't get outside and take real photos.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Well,
yes.
we are having a chat next Saturday about the architecture of Half-Life Alyx, if anyone's interested.
That's
It would be
had
a
a couple mentions.
3-hour deep dive.
Our people in the comments are going to be very interested. Where can we find that?
It will come. It will be on Zoom. Twitter is the best way to find where that's happening. It's kind of self-organized, not with any kind of.
It's a very nerdy thing. I have to raise the nerd.
Here.
Well, anyway, thank you all for joining and kind of bringing your ideas and experiences to this. Massive thank you to Lara as well. Been a pleasure to work with, and there's also something I think Laura's been very shy about, but I'd like to put a bit of attention on. You've been doing a project with another friend of a festival, Jim Stevenson, which I think a lot of our audience would be really interested in. So do you want to say a bit about that, Lara?
Sure. I don't normally do self-promotion, but here we go. Yeah. So I've been making a series of films with Jim Stevenson called Practice, and we released the first episode. Gosh, just like literally like the weekend before lockdown. We had the kind of premiere event. I think it was like the last event that anyone went to. And so the idea of the films is that they look at a specific practice or architect in a kind of slow way. So we really kind of dig deep into their ways of working rather than looking at their kind of finished built work. And you can see it on Jim's Vimeo channel. I think that's probably the best place to find it. But it's been on kind of Design Boom and other places. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. There's more coming. Sam Jacob, Mary Duggan, O'Donnell Toymey, Field and Fowles. There's more.
Yeah, and when we get off air, I'm going to get on your case about my zine and when that's coming in the post. Is your merchandise still available to purchase?
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure if you get in touch with us, we're up for letting you have anything. Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah, anyway, so brilliant, yeah, brilliant, Laura, brilliant program today, and thanks for sharing it with us. Just before you all go, I'd like to again turn you to our website. I'm sure you've all seen that before, but just for any of you tuning in from different time zones, I'm just going to quickly share that. So zoomedinfestival.com. So tomorrow, myself and a friend of mine, Francisco Ibanez, we're going to be sharing a program which is curated around an exhibition we had planned for the summer. We have no idea if it's happening or not, but it's happening online now. So tune in tomorrow from 1:30. We have a really good panel talk, including the curators of the British Pavilion for Venice, which again is another thing. Who knows what's going to happen there? But it's all online, so do tune in and see that, and loads of other exciting. We've got Lorient on at 3 p.m. We've got a load of our photographers from the exhibition at 5 p.m. and a secret / not quite organised film screening at the end of the day. But that's a really big one. We've been keeping it under wraps. Hopefully we can get the details sorted, and I think you're really going to enjoy that. And once again, we do have the charity print sale on, supporting the work of the Trussell Trust. So we have affordable prints starting from just £25, and there's photographers here who normally sell prints kind of in the hundreds and thousands. So it's a rare opportunity to get your hands on these. They're really beautiful images, and we also have a few at the end of the limited edition ones, which are kind of more of a premium offering, but still, some great stuff there. So have a look at zoomedinfestival.com. Tomorrow is our last day, but I think everyone's asking when part 2 is already, so we're going to have to think about some extra stuff. I had a good email from our friend Mike Kelly at AP Almanac, our media partner, so shout out to him. We might have to do some things, but yeah, thanks again for joining us. I think, do we have someone else? No, so Francisco is meant to join, but he said he's just gone for a jog and is in a state, so he's not going to, but we'll see him again. We'll see him again tomorrow, and I'm hoping that I will see you again tomorrow. Everyone at YouTube at home, thanks for your comments. We've been blown away by how many views we've had and all the engagement on social media. Email's been pinging with print sales as well. By the way, we do dispatch not just in the UK, but internationally, and we're going to sort it out. So in the UK, we're using our print partner, imageprintcentre.co.uk, to kind of give us prints at a really good price. But then internationally, we're going to use online services so we can kind of post from locally to you, so you're not paying silly postage. So as much of your money as possible is going to the prints and going to our charity, the Trussell Trust. So again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care.
See you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.